My mother screamed, "You're an embarrassment," at me in front of a packed dining room. What she didn't know was that I owned the entire restaurant chain she was eating at. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I learned early that in my family, your worth was measured by the size of your office and the letters after your name. Growing up in Riverside, California, success looked like one thing: a corner office, a six-figure salary, and a business card that impressed strangers at dinner parties. My parents, Patricia and Robert Martinez, had built Martinez Associates from the ground up, turning their small accounting firm into one of the most respected financial consulting companies in Southern California. They employed 37 people, drove matching BMWs, and never let us forget that everything we had came from their dedication to building something respectable. I was supposed to be next in line, the smart daughter who graduated summa cum laude from USC with a degree in business administration, the one who could carry on the family legacy and maybe even expand it beyond what they had imagined. My brother, Michael, had already disappointed them by becoming a high school history teacher, and my sister Amanda was still finding herself through various graduate programs. I was their last hope, their golden child, the one who would make all their sacrifices worthwhile. But there was a problem. Every time I sat in those pristine conference rooms during my internships, surrounded by spreadsheets and quarterly reports, I felt like I was suffocating. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the air too thin, the conversations too distant from anything that mattered to real people, living real lives. I kept thinking about my grandmother Elena, my abuela, who had passed away when I was 16. She used to cook for our entire extended family every Sunday, turning her tiny kitchen into a place of magic where the smell of cumin and fresh cilantro could make even the worst week feel manageable. Abuela never went to college. She never had a business card or a retirement plan or any of the markers of success my parents valued. But when she died, over 300 people showed up to her funeral, all of them with stories about how her food had comforted them during difficult times, how her kitchen table had been a place of healing and connection. I remember standing at her grave, watching grown men cry over her tamales, and thinking that she had built something more valuable than any corporate empire. The disconnect between what my family expected and what I actually wanted started small. I would drive home from my internship at a prestigious consulting firm and find myself stopping at small family restaurants, sitting alone at counter stools, watching the controlled chaos of a dinner rush. I loved seeing how the servers knew their regular customers' orders by heart, how the cooks worked together like a perfectly choreographed dance, how the whole place could feel like an extended family gathering even when it was packed with strangers. I started cooking seriously during my senior year of college, initially just as a way to de-stress from my business classes. My tiny apartment kitchen became my sanctuary, the one place where I could create something with my hands instead of just analyzing other people's numbers. I would experiment with my abuela's recipes, trying to recreate the flavors I remembered from childhood while adding my own touches. My roommate Sarah Thompson, who was studying journalism, became my willing taste tester and biggest cheerleader. Sarah was the first person who suggested I was meant for something different than the path my parents had mapped out for me. She would watch me light up while explaining the difference between various chili peppers or describing my latest attempt at perfecting mole sauce, and she would say things like, "Jess, I've never seen you this excited about a profit and loss statement." She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. The defining moment came during a family dinner at the country club where my parents were members. We were celebrating my upcoming graduation, and the conversation inevitably turned to my future plans. My father was explaining to the other families at nearby tables how I would be joining Martinez and Associates as a junior associate, with the eventual goal of taking over operations. My mother was already talking about the corner office they were preparing for me, complete with a view of the city and space for the awards I would undoubtedly earn. But as I sat there, cutting into an overpriced steak that had no seasoning and Less soul, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. The food was beautiful to look at, artfully arranged on expensive china, but it tasted like nothing. It was exactly the kind of impressive, empty experience I was supposed to aspire to create, in every aspect of my life. That's when I knew I had to find the courage to disappoint them. I started small, testing the waters. I mentioned during a family barbecue that I had been thinking about taking some cooking classes, just as a hobby. My mother's response was swift and dismissive. "Cooking is fine for entertaining, mija, but it's not a career. You didn't spend 4 years studying business to become someone's kitchen help." My father nodded in agreement, adding that the restaurant industry was notoriously unstable and that I was too smart to waste my education on something so unpredictable. But their dismissal only made me more determined to explore what was calling to me. I started working weekend shifts at a small Mexican restaurant near campus, telling my parents I was doing research for a potential consulting project about small business operations. The owner, an elderly man named Carlos who reminded me of my abuela's brother, let me start as a hostess but quickly moved me into the kitchen when he saw how eager I was to learn. Those weekend shifts became the highlight of my week. I learned how to properly dice onions without crying, how to tell when oil was hot enough for frying just by listening to it, how to balance acid and heat and sweetness in ways that made people close their eyes and smile when they took their first bite. Carlos taught me that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding your ingredients, respecting your customers, and putting love into every single plate you sent out. More importantly, I learned about the business side of running a restaurant in ways no textbook could have taught me. I saw how Carlos managed inventory with nothing more than experience and intuition, how he handled difficult customers with patience and grace, how he treated his employees like family and earned their loyalty in return. I watched him make a dozen small decisions every day that kept his restaurant profitable and his community fed. And I realized this was the kind of problem-solving that actually excited me. The more time I spent in that kitchen, the more I began to envision a different kind of future for myself. I started developing ideas for my own restaurant concept, something that would honor my abuela's memory while creating the kind of gathering place I had always craved. I imagined a space that felt like a home away from home, where families could come for celebrations and comfort food, where the recipes told stories and the atmosphere invited people to linger and connect. I knew my parents would never understand, but I also knew I couldn't spend the rest of my life trying to fit into their definition of success. I had found something that made me come alive, something that felt like purpose instead of just paychecks. The question was whether I would have the courage to choose my own path over their approval, and whether I could build something meaningful enough to prove that success doesn't always look the way your family expects it to. As graduation approached, I spent sleepless nights working on a business plan for what I was starting to call Abuela's Kitchen. I researched locations, calculated startup costs, and dreamed about creating a place where food would bring people together the same way my grandmother's cooking had brought our family together. I had no idea that this simple dream would eventually grow into something that would change not just my life, but my entire family's understanding of what it means to build something truly valuable. The stage was set for the conversation that would change everything. The moment when I would have to tell my parents that their carefully laid plans for my future were not the same as my own dreams for my life. Growing up as Jessica Martinez meant living in a world where every achievement was measured against an invisible scoreboard that my parents had created long before I was born. Our house in Riverside sat in one of those pristine suburban neighborhoods, where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every driveway showcased cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The Martinez family had worked their way up from my grandparents' modest beginnings, and my parents never let us forget the sacrifices that had been made to give us opportunities they never had. Sunday dinners at our house were less about family, bonding, and more about performance reviews. My father would sit at the head of our mahogany dining table, asking Michael about his teaching certification progress, questioning Amanda about her latest academic pursuits, and always saving the most attention for me and my business school achievements. The conversation would inevitably turn to networking opportunities, internship possibilities, and the importance of building relationships with the right kind of people. My mother had a particular way of discussing success that made it clear there were only certain acceptable paths for a Martinez daughter. She would talk about the wives of my father's business associates, always highlighting the ones who had law degrees or worked in finance or held positions at prestigious companies. She never mentioned the women who had started their own businesses, unless those businesses involved consulting or real estate or something that sounded impressive at cocktail parties. The country club where we held all our important celebrations became a symbol of everything I was supposed to aspire to achieve. The Riverside Hills Country Club was where deals were made over golf games, where my parents introduced us to other successful families, and where I learned that success meant being able to afford the monthly membership fees and feeling comfortable in rooms full of people who had never worried about money. Every birthday, graduation, and major milestone was celebrated there, surrounded by crystal glasses and cloth napkins and servers who knew exactly how to be invisible until needed. I remember one particular evening when I was 21, sitting at a table full of my parents' friends, listening to them discuss their children's career trajectories. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Henderson was bragging about her son's promotion at a tech startup. Mr. Patel was explaining how his daughter had just made partner at her law firm ahead of schedule. When the attention turned to me, my mother launched into her prepared speech about my business degree and my bright future at Martinez Associates, painting a picture of inevitability that made me feel like I was drowning. The expectations weren't just about career choices. They extended to every aspect of how I was supposed to present myself to the world. My wardrobe consisted primarily of blazers and dress pants in neutral colors, the kind of professional attire that would photograph well at networking events. My mother had strong opinions about everything from my hairstyle to my choice of handbag, always framing her suggestions as advice about making the right impression on the right people. Even my social life was subject to scrutiny. The friends I brought home needed to come from good families with respectable careers or educational goals. When I started dating in college, my parents would ask pointed questions about my boyfriends, majors, their family backgrounds, and their post-graduation plans. They wanted to make sure I was surrounding myself with people who would elevate my status rather than drag down my reputation. The pressure was particularly intense because I was the family's great hope for expansion. Michael had disappointed them by choosing education over entrepreneurship, and while they were proud of his dedication to teaching, they made it clear that his salary and social status were not what they had envisioned for their children. Amanda was still searching for her path through various graduate programs, changing her focus every semester and frustrating my parents with her lack of direction. I became the repository for all their ambitions and dreams. They would talk about the day when Martinez and Associates would become Martinez and Martinez, when I would bring fresh ideas and youthful energy to their established client base. They had already started introducing me to their most important clients, explaining that I would be taking on more responsibility after graduation and eventually transitioning into a leadership role. The weight of these expectations followed me everywhere. During my business classes, I would sit in lectures about corporate strategy and organizational behavior, taking careful notes and participating in discussions while feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's story. My professors knew me as the engaged student who always had thoughtful questions and well-researched project presentations. My classmates saw me as someone who had her future figured out, someone who didn't have to worry about job searching because her career path was already secured. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I would find myself researching things that had nothing to do with accounting or consulting. I would spend hours reading about restaurant management, studying successful food entrepreneurs, and watching cooking videos that taught techniques I was dying to try. I kept these interests hidden like secrets, knowing that admitting them would lead to conversations about hobbies versus careers and the importance of staying focused on realistic goals. The disconnect became more painful as graduation approached. My parents had already started making plans for my transition into their company, discussing office space renovations and introducing me to potential mentors within their professional network. They talked about my future with such certainty, such pride, that I began to feel like I was betraying them just by having different dreams. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult as relatives and family friends would congratulate me on my upcoming entry into the family business. Everyone seemed to know exactly what my life was supposed to look like, and their enthusiasm for my predetermined path made me feel more isolated and conflicted. I would smile and thank them for their good wishes while internally screaming that none of them had ever asked what I actually wanted to do with my life. The most challenging part was recognizing how much my parents had sacrificed to create these opportunities for me. They had worked incredibly hard to build their business and establish their reputation in the community. They genuinely believed that joining their company represented the best possible future for me, combining financial security with family legacy and professional respect. Their expectations weren't born from selfishness, but from love, and their desire to see me succeed in ways they defined as meaningful. Understanding their motivations made it even harder to contemplate disappointing them. I knew that choosing a different path would feel like rejection to them, like I was throwing away everything they had worked to provide. The guilt of wanting something different was almost as overwhelming as the fear of never pursuing what actually called to me. This was the world I was preparing to challenge when I finally decided to tell them about my real dreams. A world where success had very specific definitions, where certain careers were respectable and others were not, where family, loyalty meant following the path that had been carefully constructed for me long before I was old enough to have opinions about my own future. Part 3. Meeting David, the unexpected partnership. It was during my final semester of business school that I met David Chen. Though our first encounter was hardly romantic or even particularly pleasant, I was working one of my secret weekend shifts at Carlos's restaurant, completely absorbed in learning how to properly grill carne asada, when this guy in an expensive suit walked in looking like he'd never eaten anywhere that didn't require reservations. He ordered our most basic combination plate, but spent the entire meal typing on his phone, barely acknowledging the food in front of him or the server who kept refilling his water glass. What irritated me most was how he seemed to be treating the restaurant like a temporary inconvenience rather than the warm, family-owned establishment that had become my second home. Carlos had built this place with his own hands, painting every wall and installing every light fixture, and watching someone dismiss it so casually felt personal. When David left without finishing his meal and barely touched his horchata, I found myself muttering complaints about entitled customers who didn't appreciate good food. I didn't expect to see him again, but he returned the following weekend, this time without the suit and phone. He sat at the same table, ordered the same combination plate, but actually ate it this time. I watched from the kitchen as he carefully tasted each component of his meal, taking notes in a small notebook that he pulled from his jacket pocket. When he asked to speak with the owner, I assumed he was going to complain about something, but instead he spent 20 minutes asking Carlos about his recipes, his suppliers, and his business philosophy. That's when I learned that David wasn't just another corporate customer killing time between meetings. He was a business consultant who specialized in helping small restaurants improve their operations and expand their reach. He had grown up in his family's Chinese restaurant in San Francisco, working every position from dishwasher to manager before getting his MBA and starting his own consulting firm. He understood the restaurant business from both the operational and financial sides, which made him invaluable to owners who had great food but struggled with the business aspects. Our second real interaction happened when Carlos asked me to join their conversation about potential improvements to the restaurant's efficiency. David looked surprised to see me emerge from the kitchen, having assumed I was just another college student working part-time for spending money. When Carlos explained that I was studying business and had been helping him think through some operational challenges, David's entire demeanor shifted from polite professionalism to genuine interest. We spent the next hour discussing everything, from inventory management to customer retention strategies. David had ideas about how Carlos could streamline his ordering process and reduce food waste, while I had observations about customer preferences and peak hour patterns that I'd noticed. During my time working there, the conversation flowed easily, with each of us building on the other's suggestions and creating solutions that none of us would have developed alone. What struck me most about David was how he talked about the restaurant business. He didn't see it as a lesser form of entrepreneurship or a risky venture for people who couldn't succeed in more traditional corporate environments. He understood that restaurants were community builders, that they served purposes far beyond just selling food, and that running one successfully required a unique combination of creativity, business acumen, and genuine care for people. Over the next few weeks, David became a regular customer and eventually a friend. He was working with 3 other small restaurants in the area, helping them develop systems that would allow them to grow without losing the personal touch that made them special. His approach was completely different from the corporate consulting I had studied in school. Instead of imposing standardized solutions, he took time to understand each restaurant's unique culture and customer base, then developed strategies that enhanced what was already working well. I started looking forward to his visits, not just because I enjoyed our conversations about business strategy, but because he was the first person who seemed to understand my passion for the restaurant industry without treating it like a phase I would eventually outgrow. He never asked when I was going to get serious about my career or suggested that working in a restaurant was beneath my education level. Instead, he encouraged me to think more deeply about what kind of food business I might want to create and what would make it different from what already existed. The turning point in our relationship came when I finally worked up the courage to tell him about my dream of opening my own restaurant. I had been developing the concept for Abuela's Kitchen in secret, working on recipes and business plans late at night when my roommates were asleep. I was terrified that even David, who understood the industry, would point out all the reasons why a recent business school graduate shouldn't attempt to start a restaurant without more experience. Instead, he listened carefully to my ideas about creating a modern Mexican-American restaurant that would honor traditional recipes while incorporating contemporary techniques in presentation. He asked thoughtful questions about my target market, my pricing strategy, and my plans for staffing and operations. Most importantly, he didn't try to talk me out of it or suggest that I should work for someone else's restaurant first to gain more experience. What David offered was something I hadn't expected: a partnership. He had been looking for the right opportunity to transition from consulting to actually owning and operating his own restaurant. He had the business expertise and industry connections, while I had the culinary vision and the deep understanding of what modern customers wanted from their dining experience. Together, we could create something that neither of us could achieve alone. The partnership made sense on multiple levels. David's consulting work had given him relationships with suppliers, contractors, and other service providers who could help us get started more efficiently and cost-effectively. He understood the financial side of restaurant operations, from cash flow management to inventory optimization, areas where my business school education was helpful but not sufficient. Meanwhile, I brought the creative vision, the cultural authenticity, and the passion for creating an experience that would make customers feel like they were being welcomed into someone's home. More than that, David understood my family situation in ways that my college friends couldn't. His own parents had initially been disappointed when he chose to work with small restaurants instead of joining a prestigious consulting firm that worked with Fortune 500 companies. They had immigrated from Taiwan and sacrificed enormously to give him educational opportunities, and they struggled to understand why he would choose to work with businesses they saw as risky and unstable. He knew what it felt like to love your family while choosing a path they couldn't initially support. He understood the guilt of disappointing parents who had worked so hard to provide opportunities and the fear of proving them right if the unconventional choice didn't work out. Having someone who understood these complexities made me feel less alone as I prepared to have the conversation with my parents about my real career goals. David also brought a different perspective on success that helped me articulate what I was trying to achieve. He talked about building businesses that created value for communities, not just shareholders. He believed that the best restaurants served purposes beyond profit, that they created gathering places where relationships were built and memories were made. This philosophy aligned perfectly with my vision for Abuela's Kitchen as a place that would honor my grandmother's legacy while serving the needs of modern families. As our partnership developed, so did our personal relationship. We spent countless hours together, planning our restaurant concept, visiting potential locations, and testing recipes in my tiny apartment kitchen. David had a quiet confidence that balanced my enthusiastic energy and a practical approach to problem-solving that complemented my creative instincts. He never made me feel like my ideas were unrealistic, but he helped me think through the practical steps needed to turn those ideas into reality. By the time I was ready to tell my parents about my career change, David had become not just my business partner, but my closest confidant, and eventually, my romantic partner. He was someone who saw the same potential in the restaurant business that I did, who understood why I was willing to risk family disappointment to pursue something that felt like calling rather than just a job. Having David's support didn't make the upcoming conversation with my family any easier, but it did make me feel more confident about my decision. I knew that whatever their reaction, I wouldn't be facing the challenges of starting a restaurant alone. I had found someone who shared my vision and complemented my skills, someone who believed in what we could build together. Part 4. The Why. Family's Resistance. The conversation I had been dreading finally happened on a warm Sunday evening in May, 3 weeks before my college graduation. My parents had invited the extended family over for what they called a pre-graduation celebration, but what felt more like a public declaration of my predetermined future. The dining room was filled with aunts, uncles, and family friends, all eager to congratulate me on my upcoming entry into Martinez Associates and share their own success stories about children who had followed sensible career paths. I waited until the guests had left and my siblings had gone home to their own apartments before asking my parents if we could talk privately. My mother was loading the dishwasher with our good china while my father organized the leftover food in the refrigerator, both of them still glowing with pride from an evening of showing off their accomplished daughter to their social circle. When I told them I had something important to discuss about my career plans, they both smiled with the kind of anticipation parents have when they expect good news. My mother dried her hands on a dish towel and sat down at the kitchen island, where we had shared countless conversations over the years. My father poured himself a glass of wine and settled into his usual chair, giving me his full attention in the way that made me feel both supported and terrified. I started carefully, explaining that my time working at Carlos's restaurant had taught me things about business that I couldn't learn in any classroom. I described how I had discovered a passion for the hospitality industry and developed ideas about creating gathering places that served communities in meaningful ways. I talked about the satisfaction of creating something tangible that brought people joy and the excitement I felt when imagining my own restaurant concept. My mother's expression shifted from interested to concerned as she began to understand where the conversation was heading. She set down her coffee cup and leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was trying to guide me away from what she perceived as poor decisions. "Mija, working in a restaurant has been a nice experience for you, but you need to think practically about your future. You've spent 4 years studying business so you could join our company and eventually take it over. That's security. That's building on what we've already established." My father's reaction was more measured, but equally dismissive. He asked practical questions about startup costs, failure rates in the restaurant industry, and the challenges of competing with established businesses. Every question was framed as evidence that I hadn't thought through the realities of what I was proposing. When I mentioned David and our partnership plans, his skepticism deepened. He wanted to know about David's background, his financial resources, and what kind of track record he had with successful restaurant ventures. The conversation became more heated when I explained that I didn't want to join Martinez and Associates at all, that I had never wanted to be an accountant or a business consultant, and that I had been working toward this restaurant dream for months. My mother's voice rose as she pointed out all the sacrifices they had made to pay for my education, all the networking they had done to create opportunities for me, and all the planning they had invested in preparing a place for me in their company. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for," she said, her disappointment evident in every word. "Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunity you're rejecting? You could have a steady income, benefits, a retirement plan, respect in the community. Instead, you want to work 18-hour days in a hot kitchen for a business that might fail within 2 years." My father took a different approach, trying to appeal to my practical side by walking through the financial realities of restaurant ownership. He had done his research, pulling up statistics on his phone about restaurant failure rates, average profit margins, and the difficulties of securing financing for new ventures. He painted a picture of long hours, thin profits, and constant stress, contrasting it with the security and growth potential of joining an established business. When I tried to explain that David's consulting experience would help us avoid many of the common pitfalls that caused restaurants to fail, they became even more skeptical. They wanted to know why. If David was such a successful consultant, he would want to risk his own money on an unproven concept with someone who had never run a business before. Their questions made it clear that they saw my partnership with David as evidence of naivety rather than strategic planning. The most painful part of the conversation was when my mother questioned my motivations and maturity. She suggested that I was confusing a college phase with a career calling, that my enjoyment of cooking as a hobby had clouded my judgment about the realities of running a business. She reminded me of other interests I had pursued passionately during high school and college before moving on to something else, implying that this restaurant dream would eventually fade the same way. My father worried aloud about what their friends and business associates would think when they learned that their daughter, the one they had been bragging about for months, had decided to reject a secure position in an established company to start a restaurant. He talked about the family's reputation in the community and the potential embarrassment of having to explain why their business school graduate was working as a cook instead of following the professional path she had been educated for. The conversation lasted until well past midnight, with both my parents taking turns trying to convince me that I was making a terrible mistake. They offered compromises. I could work at Martinez and Associates for a few years to gain real business experience, then consider starting a restaurant as a side venture. I could pursue a master's degree in hospitality management to prove I was serious about the industry. I could work for an established restaurant chain to learn the business before attempting to start my own. But every compromise they suggested involved delaying or abandoning my actual dream in favor of paths they found more acceptable. They couldn't understand that I didn't want to work in corporate accounting for even 1 year, that I had already learned what I needed to know about the restaurant business, and that waiting would only make it harder to pursue what I really wanted to do. The evening ended with my parents asking me to postpone any major decisions until after graduation, giving them time to research the restaurant industry more thoroughly, and giving me time to reconsider what they saw as an impulsive choice. They wanted me to meet with some of their business contacts who had experience with restaurant investments, hoping that outside perspectives would convince me of the risks I was considering. I agreed to their request for more time, but I knew that no amount of research or outside opinions would change my fundamental desire to create something of my own in an industry that excited me. The conversation had clarified something important. My parents' love and support were conditional on my choices aligning with their definition of success. They weren't interested in understanding why the restaurant business appealed to me or what I hoped to achieve through Abuela's Kitchen. They only wanted to steer me back toward the safe, predictable path they had envisioned. Over the next few weeks, my parents enlisted my siblings and several family friends in their campaign to change my mind. Michael, despite his own experience with family disappointment over career choices, urged me to consider the financial security of joining the family business. Amanda worried about the stress and uncertainty of entrepreneurship, suggesting that I could always pursue restaurant ownership later in life when I had more savings and experience. Each conversation reinforced the same themes. I was too young and inexperienced to take such a risk. The restaurant industry was too unstable to provide long-term security, and I was foolish to reject an opportunity that other people would eagerly accept. No one asked about my passion for the work, my vision for what kind of restaurant I wanted to create, or my excitement about building something meaningful with David. The resistance from my family made me more determined to prove that they were wrong about both my capabilities and my chosen path. I knew that their concerns came from love and their desire to protect me from failure. But I also knew that staying safe meant giving up the possibility of creating something extraordinary. The stage was set for a more dramatic confrontation, when I would have to choose definitively between their approval and my dreams. Part 5. The Declaration and Escalation. 2 weeks before graduation, I made the decision that would change everything. David and I had found the perfect location for Abuela's Kitchen, a former family restaurant in downtown Phoenix that had been closed for 6 months after the original owners retired. The space had excellent bones with a large kitchen, a cozy dining room that could seat 60 people, and a small patio area that would be perfect for outdoor dining during Arizona's beautiful winter months. More importantly, the rent was within our budget, and the landlord was willing to work with us on improvements and modifications. The opportunity had a tight timeline. We needed to sign the lease within 2 weeks and begin renovations immediately, if we wanted to open by late fall, which would give us time to establish ourselves before the busy winter tourist season. David had already secured preliminary approval for a small business loan, and I had enough money saved from my internships and part-time work to cover my portion of the startup costs. Everything was falling into place except for one crucial element. I needed to tell my parents that I was moving forward with the restaurant, regardless of their approval. I chose to have this conversation at our family's traditional Sunday dinner, partly because I thought the familiar setting might soften their reaction, but mostly because I wanted my siblings to be present as witnesses and potentially allies. Michael and Amanda both knew about my restaurant plans and had expressed cautious support, though neither had been willing to openly contradict our parents' opposition to the idea. I waited until we had finished eating my mother's famous tres leches cake before standing up and asking for everyone's attention. The mood around the table was relaxed and happy, with my father telling stories about his golf game and my mother planning a small graduation party for the following weekend. I almost lost my courage seeing how content and proud they looked, knowing that what I was about to say would shatter their good mood and probably damage our relationship for months to come. I have something important to tell all of you, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. David and I have found a location for our restaurant, and we're signing the lease this week. I'm moving to Phoenix next month to start renovations, and we plan to open Abuela's Kitchen in October. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and my father set down his coffee cup with enough force to make it rattle against the saucer. Michael and Amanda exchanged glances across the table, both of them clearly wishing they were anywhere else. My mother was the first to speak, her voice tight with controlled anger. Jessica, we agreed that you would wait until after graduation to make any major decisions. We've been researching restaurant investments, and everything we've learned confirms that this is a terrible mistake. You're going to lose all your money and ruin your career prospects for something that has almost no chance of succeeding. My father's reaction was more measured but equally disapproving. He pulled out his phone and showed me statistics he had compiled about restaurant failures in Phoenix, pointing out that the location I was considering was in an area with high commercial turnover and limited foot traffic. He questioned David's experience, suggesting that consulting for restaurants was completely different from actually operating one successfully. What hurt most was how quickly the conversation turned from my announcement to an intervention-style discussion about my poor judgment and immaturity. My mother talked about how embarrassed she would be to explain to her friends that her daughter, the business school graduate, was working as a cook instead of joining the family company. My father worried about the financial risk and the potential damage to my long-term earning potential if the restaurant failed. "You're 22 years old," my mother said, her voice rising with each word. "You've never managed employees, never handled serious financial responsibility, never dealt with the kind of stress that comes with risking your own money on a business venture. You think you know what you're doing because you've worked part-time at someone else's restaurant, but that's not the same as being responsible for every aspect of operations." When I tried to explain that David's experience would help us avoid many of the common mistakes that caused restaurants to fail, my father dismissed our partnership as potentially problematic. He wanted to know what would happen if David and I disagreed about major decisions, what legal protections I had if the partnership dissolved, and whether I had considered the tax implications of restaurant ownership versus employment at an established company. The most painful moment came when my mother stood up from the table and said, "If you're determined to embarrass this family by throwing away your education and your opportunities, then you need to understand that you're doing it without our support. Don't expect us to bail you out when this restaurant fails, and you're left with debt and no career prospects." My siblings tried to mediate, with Michael suggesting that maybe I could work part-time at the restaurant while also taking a position at Martinez Associates, and Amanda proposing that I could pursue restaurant ownership as a long-term goal while building experience in a more traditional business environment first. But their compromise suggestions only reinforced how little they understood my actual goals and desires. The dinner ended with my parents making it clear that they considered my decision final proof that I was too immature and impractical to be trusted with important choices. They announced that they would no longer discuss the restaurant plan because they didn't want to waste time arguing about something they couldn't prevent. My mother added that she hoped I would come to my senses before it was too late, but that she wouldn't continue to stress herself trying to talk sense into someone who was determined to make a terrible mistake. Over the next week, the situation escalated beyond our immediate family. My parents shared their concerns with aunts, uncles, and family friends, framing my decision as a rebellious phase that they hoped would pass before I did permanent damage to my future. I started receiving calls and text messages from relatives who wanted to share their own opinions about the risks of restaurant ownership and the wisdom of joining an established family business instead. My Aunt Carmen, who had always been one of my biggest supporters, called to express her disappointment and concern. She reminded me of how hard my parents had worked to build their business and create opportunities for their children, suggesting that rejecting their offer was ungrateful and short-sighted. My uncle Roberto, who owned several rental properties, offered to share horror stories about restaurant tenants who had failed to pay rent and been forced to close within their first year of operation. The most hurtful response came from my godmother, Luce, who had known me since birth and usually treated me like her own daughter. She called my mother to express her concern about my rebellion and suggested that I was making this decision to hurt my parents rather than because I had a genuine interest in the restaurant business. Her theory was that I was acting out because I felt too much pressure to live up to family expectations, and that the restaurant was just a way to avoid adult responsibilities. Each conversation reinforced the same themes. I was too young, too inexperienced, and too naive to succeed in such a challenging industry. Everyone had statistics about restaurant failure rates, stories about failed food businesses they had witnessed, and opinions about why joining Martinez and Associates represented a better path forward. No one asked about my specific plans for Abuela's Kitchen, my partnership with David, or what I hoped to achieve beyond simply rebelling against family expectations. The campaign to change my mind extended to my college friends and professors as well. My parents reached out to my business school advisor to express their concerns about my career choices and ask whether she could help convince me to reconsider. They contacted friends' parents who worked in the hospitality industry, hoping to find someone who could speak authoritatively about the challenges I would face as a restaurant owner. Instead of deterring me, this coordinated opposition made me more determined to prove that everyone was wrong about both my capabilities and my chosen career path. I spent hours refining my business plan, researching successful restaurant openings in Phoenix, and documenting every aspect of our preparation process. I wanted to be able to demonstrate that David and I had thought through every potential challenge and developed strategies for overcoming the obstacles that defeated less prepared entrepreneurs. The final escalation came when my parents announced that they would not be attending my college graduation if I was still planning to move forward with the restaurant. They explained that they couldn't celebrate an achievement that I was immediately going to waste on what they considered a foolish and self-destructive decision. My mother said that watching me graduate would be too painful, knowing that I was about to throw away everything my education was supposed to provide. This ultimatum forced me to choose between family harmony and my entrepreneurial dreams at what should have been one of the most important moments of my educational journey. The message was clear. Their support and presence in my life were conditional on my making choices they approved of. If I insisted on pursuing my own path, I would be doing it without their participation or blessing. I realized then that this conflict was about much more than career choices or financial security. It was about control, about whether I would live my life according to their script or find the courage to write my own story. The restaurant had become a symbol of my independence and my willingness to risk their disapproval in pursuit of something that felt meaningful to me. The stage was set for me to either capitulate to their demands or move forward with my plans, despite losing their support. I knew that choosing the restaurant meant accepting that I might be estranged from my family for months or even years, but I also knew that abandoning my dreams to maintain their approval would leave me wondering forever what I might have achieved if I had been brave enough to try. The week leading up to my graduation became a campaign of psychological warfare orchestrated by my entire extended family. It started with what seemed like innocent check-in calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, but each conversation followed the same script. Expressions of concern about my impulsive decision, statistics about restaurant failures, and gentle suggestions that I was making a mistake that would haunt me for years to come. My cousin Elena, who worked as a loan officer at a major bank, called on Tuesday morning with what she presented as helpful professional advice. She had pulled data on small business loans in the restaurant sector and wanted to share some sobering statistics about default rates and foreclosure timelines. Her voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with failed businesses regularly, and she painted a picture of young entrepreneurs who had lost everything because they overestimated their abilities and underestimated market challenges. "Jessica, I see this all the time," she said, her tone mixing sympathy with condescension. "Smart people with good educations who think they can succeed where others have failed, usually because they don't have enough respect for how difficult these businesses really are. The restaurant industry isn't like other sectors where you can recover from mistakes easily. One bad month can destroy years of work, and most new restaurants don't survive their first year." Elena's call was followed by a visit from my Uncle Miguel, who had driven 2 hours from Los Angeles specifically to have what he called a heart-to-heart conversation about my future. He arrived unannounced on Wednesday evening, presenting himself as the voice of reason who could help me see past my emotional attachment to an unrealistic dream. Miguel had owned several businesses over the years, including a brief and unsuccessful venture in the food service industry, which he felt gave him special insight into the challenges I would face. He sat across from me at my parents' kitchen table, pulling out a folder of documents he had prepared to support his arguments. The folder contained newspaper clippings about restaurant closures, printouts of industry reports about profit margins and failure rates, and even photographs of empty commercial spaces that had once housed popular restaurants. He spread these, Materials across the table like evidence in a trial, each piece intended to demonstrate the futility of my chosen path. "Mia, look at these numbers," he said, pointing to a chart showing average restaurant lifespans. 70% of restaurants fail within the first year, and 90% are gone within 5 years. These aren't small mom-and-pop places, run by people who don't know what they're doing. These are restaurants started by experienced chefs and business people who thought they had everything figured out. Miguel's presentation was thorough and well-researched, but it was also completely one-sided. He had collected every piece of negative information he could find about restaurant ownership while ignoring success stories or industry growth trends. When I tried to share details about my business plan or David's consulting experience, he dismissed these factors as irrelevant compared to the broader industry statistics he had compiled. The most frustrating part of Miguel's visit was how he framed his opposition as protection rather than control. He repeatedly emphasized that he was trying to save me from making a devastating mistake, that his research was motivated by love and concern for my future. He painted himself as the rational adult who could see dangers that I was too young and inexperienced to recognize, making it difficult to argue against his position without seeming naive or stubborn. Thursday brought a coordinated effort from my parents' social circle, beginning with a call from Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter had graduated from business school the previous year and was now working as a financial analyst at a prestigious investment firm. Mrs. Rodriguez wanted to arrange a conversation between her daughter and me, believing that hearing from a recent graduate who had chosen a traditional career path would help me understand what I was giving up. The conversation with Maria Rodriguez took place over lunch at an upscale restaurant where she could demonstrate the lifestyle that came with her corporate position. She arrived wearing an expensive suit and carrying a designer handbag, clearly intending to embody the success that awaited me if I made sensible career choices. Throughout the meal, she talked about her salary, her benefits package, her travel opportunities, and her rapid advancement within her company. "Jessica, I know restaurant work seems exciting because it's creative and hands-on," Maria said, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "But you need to think about your long-term financial security. I'm already contributing to a 401k, I have excellent health insurance, and I'm on track for promotion to senior analyst within 2 years. Can your restaurant offer you that kind of stability and growth potential?" Maria's arguments were practical and well-intentioned, but they completely missed the point of why I wanted to start my own business. She couldn't understand that financial security wasn't my primary motivation, that I was willing to accept more risk in exchange for the opportunity to create something meaningful and build a business that reflected my values. Her definition of success was entirely external: salary, title, benefits, and social status. The opposition campaign reached its peak on Friday, when my parents arranged what they called a family meeting, but what felt more like an intervention. They had invited my siblings, my grandparents, and 2 family friends who had experience in business ownership to participate in a final attempt to change my mind. The meeting was held at my parents' house, in the formal living room that was usually reserved for important occasions and difficult conversations. My grandmother Rosa, who had always been one of my strongest supporters, was the most difficult person to face during this gathering. She had emigrated from Mexico with almost nothing and worked multiple jobs to help my grandfather establish their small construction business. She understood sacrifice and hard work in ways that younger family members didn't, and her disappointment in my choices carried more weight than anyone else's opposition. "Mija, your parents have given you opportunities that my generation could never have imagined," she said, her voice heavy with the authority of lived experience. "You have education, you have connections, you have chances to build security that we fought for decades to create. Why would you risk all of that on something so uncertain when you could join your father's business and build on what we've already established?" My grandfather's opposition was even more painful because it came from someone who had actually started his own business and succeeded despite enormous challenges. He talked about the 18-hour days, the constant financial stress, the years of uncertainty before his construction company became profitable. He described the toll that business ownership had taken on his health and his relationships, painting entrepreneurship as a burden rather than an opportunity. "Starting a business is not romantic, Jessica," he said, his weathered hands gesturing for emphasis. "It's not about following your passion or doing what makes you happy. It's about survival, about fighting every day to keep something alive that wants to die. You'll work harder than you've ever worked, make less money than you could make working for someone else, and risk everything you have for something that probably won't succeed." The family friends who had been invited to the meeting were equally discouraging. Mr. Herrera, who had owned a small manufacturing business before selling it and retiring, focused on the regulatory challenges and tax complications that came with business ownership. He spent 20 minutes explaining the various permits, licenses, and compliance requirements that restaurants faced, making the bureaucratic aspects sound overwhelming and potentially impossible to navigate successfully. Mrs. Santos, whose family had owned several retail stores, talked about the personal cost of entrepreneurship on family relationships and work-life balance. She described missing her children's school events because of business emergencies, taking family vacations that were interrupted by calls from employees, and living with constant anxiety about cash flow and customer satisfaction. Her message was clear. Business ownership required sacrifices that most people weren't prepared to make. The meeting lasted for over 3 hours, with each participant taking turns explaining why my restaurant plan was unrealistic and why joining Martinez and Associates represented a better path forward. They presented their arguments as facts rather than opinions, making it clear that anyone who disagreed with their assessment was either naive or irresponsible. The cumulative effect was overwhelming, designed to make me feel isolated and foolish for persisting with plans that everyone else considered doomed to failure. What made the opposition particularly effective was how personal it became. Family members didn't just question my business plan or my readiness for entrepreneurship. They questioned my judgment, my maturity, and my gratitude for the opportunities my parents had created. They suggested that my restaurant dream was really just rebellion disguised as ambition, that I was choosing risk over security not because I had a genuine vision, but because I wanted to reject everything my family represented. My mother's contribution to the meeting was the most emotionally manipulative. She talked about the sacrifices she and my father had made to pay for my education, the pride they had felt watching me excel in business school, and the excitement they had shared when planning my integration into their company. She described my rejection of their offer as a personal betrayal, suggesting that I was not just making a poor career choice, but actively hurting people who loved me. "We've spent 22 years preparing you for success," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "We've given you every advantage, every opportunity, every tool you need to build a secure and profitable future. How can you throw all of that away for something that has almost no chance of working? How can you risk not just your own future, but the reputation our family has built in this community?" The meeting ended with an ultimatum that was presented as a final act of love and protection. My parents announced that they would not provide any financial support for my restaurant venture, would not co-sign any loans or leases, and would not use their business connections to help me establish supplier relationships or find investors. They wanted to make sure I understood the full extent of the isolation I was choosing by rejecting their guidance and pursuing what they considered a self-destructive path. More significantly, they made it clear that their emotional support was also conditional on my career choices. They would not celebrate my restaurant opening, would not promote my business to their friends and colleagues, and would not provide the kind of family backing that had always been available for important milestones and challenging periods. I was welcome to remain part of the family, but only if I was willing to accept their disappointment and disapproval as permanent features of our relationship. The coordinated nature of this opposition campaign was designed to isolate me from every source of support and validation within my family structure. By presenting a united front of concern and disappointment, My relatives hoped to make me feel like the only reasonable response was to abandon my restaurant plans and accept the secure path they had mapped out for me. They genuinely believed they were protecting me from a devastating mistake, but their methods felt more like emotional blackmail than loving guidance. The campaign had the opposite effect from what my family intended. Instead of convincing me to change course, their coordinated opposition made me more determined to prove them wrong. I realized that their resistance wasn't really about protecting me from failure. It was about maintaining control over my choices and ensuring that I remained within the boundaries of what they considered acceptable success. Their inability to see any value in my restaurant dream or to respect my right to make my own decisions about risk and reward clarified something important about our relationship dynamics. I was no longer trying to gain their approval for my choices. I was preparing to succeed despite their opposition. The restaurant had become more than a business venture. It had become a symbol of my independence and my willingness to bet on myself even when the people who were supposed to support me had already decided I would fail. Part 7. The Liberation Decision. The morning after the family intervention, I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. The coordinated campaign to change my mind had finally forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for months. My family's love and support had always been conditional, based on my willingness to meet their expectations and follow the path they had chosen for me. I had spent so much energy trying to earn their approval that I had forgotten what it felt like to make decisions based on my own values and desires. I sat at my desk, looking at the business plan David and I had developed for Abuela's Kitchen, and realized that every aspect of our concept excited me in ways that joining Martinez and Associates never could. We had designed a restaurant that would serve as a community gathering place, offering fresh, authentic Mexican-American cuisine in an atmosphere that felt like an extension of someone's home. The menu honored traditional recipes while incorporating modern techniques and presentation, creating familiar flavors with an elevated dining experience. Our financial projections were conservative but realistic, based on David's extensive research of comparable restaurants in similar markets. We had identified our target demographic, developed relationships with local suppliers, and created staffing plans that would allow us to maintain quality while controlling costs. The business plan addressed every concern my family had raised about restaurant ownership, demonstrating that we had thought carefully about potential challenges and developed strategies for overcoming them. More importantly, I realized that I had been seeking permission for something that didn't require anyone else's approval. I was 22 years old, college-educated, and legally entitled to make my own career choices. David and I had the resources and expertise necessary to launch our restaurant, and we had done the research needed to give ourselves the best possible chance of success. The only thing missing was my willingness to move forward without my family's blessing. That afternoon, I called David and told him I was ready to sign the lease for our Phoenix location. We arranged to meet with the landlord the following Monday to finalize the agreement and begin planning our renovation timeline. The conversation was brief and businesslike, but I could hear the excitement in David's voice as we discussed next steps and preparation schedules. He had been waiting patiently while I worked through my family situation, never pressuring me to choose between their approval and our partnership, but clearly relieved that we could finally move forward. The next phone call was more difficult. I asked my parents to meet me for coffee on Sunday afternoon, choosing a neutral location where we could have a private conversation without the emotional baggage of family gatherings. I arrived early and spent 10 minutes rehearsing what I wanted to say, knowing that this conversation would fundamentally change our relationship regardless of how they responded. When my parents arrived, they both looked hopeful, clearly believing that the previous day's intervention had accomplished its intended purpose. My mother was smiling as she sat down, already talking about graduation plans and my transition timeline for joining Martinez and Associates. My father was checking his phone for messages from potential clients, multitasking in the way that had always characterized his approach to family time. "I asked you to meet me because I wanted to tell you personally that I'm moving forward with..." The restaurant, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. David and I are signing the lease tomorrow, and I'll be moving to Phoenix next month to begin renovations. I understand that you disagree with this decision, but it's what I'm going to do. The silence that followed was different from previous confrontations. Instead of immediate arguments or emotional appeals, both my parents seemed to deflate, as if they had finally accepted that their campaign to change my mind had failed. My mother stared at her coffee cup, while my father leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone who had just received news of a death in the family. "So, that's it?" my mother said finally, her voice flat with resignation. "After everything we've discussed, after all the research and advice from people who know better than you do, you're still determined to make this mistake?" My father's response was more measured but equally final. "If you're determined to do this, Jessica, you need to understand that you're doing it completely on your own. We won't be able to help you when things go wrong, and we won't be celebrating with you if somehow they go right. You're choosing to reject not just our advice, but our entire approach to building a successful life." What surprised me was how little their disappointment hurt this time. I had been so afraid of losing their approval that I hadn't realized how exhausting it had been to constantly seek their validation for every major decision. Their rejection of my restaurant dream wasn't really about protecting me from failure. It was about maintaining their control over my life choices and ensuring that I remained within the boundaries of what they considered acceptable success. "I understand that you can't support this decision," I said, meaning it sincerely. "I know. You believe you're trying to protect me, and I appreciate that your concerns come from love. But I also know that this is the right choice for me, and I'm prepared to accept the consequences of being wrong if that's how things turn out." The conversation ended with a strained agreement that we would maintain family relationships while acknowledging our fundamental disagreement about my career path. My parents made it clear that they wouldn't actively sabotage my restaurant venture, but they also wouldn't provide any assistance or promotion. I was welcome at family gatherings, but my business choices would not be topics of celebration or discussion. Walking back to my car after that coffee meeting, I felt lighter than I had in months. The constant tension between my desires and their expectations was finally resolved, not through compromise, but through my acceptance that we had different definitions of success and different tolerance for risk. I was free to pursue my restaurant dream without the emotional burden of trying to convince skeptical family members that my choices were valid. The liberation extended beyond just my relationship with my parents. I realized that I had been seeking validation from professors, friends, and even strangers for decisions that were ultimately mine to make. I had been presenting my restaurant plans as if they required external approval, when what I really needed was the courage to trust my own judgment and accept responsibility for my own choices. That evening, I called my landlord-to-be and confirmed our Monday meeting. I contacted the contractor David had recommended for our renovation work and scheduled an initial consultation. I researched equipment suppliers and began creating lists of everything we would need to transform an empty restaurant space into Abuela's kitchen. Each task felt purposeful and exciting in ways that job applications and interview preparations never had. I also called my siblings to inform them of my final decision, wanting them to hear directly from me rather than through our parents' interpretation of events. Michael's response was supportive but cautious, encouraging me to pursue my dreams while warning me to be prepared for the challenges ahead. Amanda was more enthusiastic, admitting that she had always admired my willingness to take risks and follow unconventional paths. "I think you're brave," Amanda said during our conversation. "I've been in graduate school for 3 years because I'm too scared to commit to any particular career direction. You've figured out what you want to do, and you're actually going after it, even though everyone is telling you it's impossible. That takes guts that I don't think I have." Her words reminded me that my choice to pursue restaurant ownership wasn't just about rejecting my family's expectations. It was about embracing a different relationship with risk and uncertainty. Instead of seeking the safety of predetermined paths and guaranteed outcomes, I was choosing to build something that reflected my values and utilized my strengths, even though success wasn't assured. The week between my liberation decision and graduation was the most productive and energizing period I had experienced in months. Without the emotional drain of constantly defending my choices to skeptical family members, I could focus entirely on the practical aspects of launching our restaurant. David and I met daily to refine our concept, finalize our menu, and coordinate the various tasks that needed to be completed before our planned opening date. We signed the lease on Monday morning in a conference room that felt more like a celebration than a business transaction. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was enthusiastic about our concept and impressed with our preparation and financial planning. He had owned the building for 15 years and had seen several restaurants come and go in our intended space, but he felt confident that our approach and experience gave us a better chance of long-term success than previous tenants. "You two have done your homework," he said as we reviewed the lease terms. "Most restaurant owners I've worked with come to me with big dreams but no real plan for achieving them. You've thought through the details and prepared for the challenges. I'm excited to see what you build here." That validation from someone with extensive experience in restaurant real estate felt more meaningful than all the family opposition I had endured over the previous months. Mr. Peterson's confidence was based on objective assessment of our business plan and preparation, rather than emotional attachment to predetermined career paths or fear of unconventional choices. The graduation ceremony itself felt anticlimactic after the intensity of the previous weeks. My parents attended, maintaining polite appearances for the sake of extended family members and friends who were also celebrating their children's achievements. They smiled for photos and congratulated me on completing my degree, but the underlying tension was evident to anyone who knew our family dynamics well. What made graduation meaningful was the presence of people who genuinely supported my chosen path. David attended, along with Sarah and several other friends who had encouraged my restaurant dreams throughout college. Carlos, the owner of the restaurant where I had learned so much about the industry, surprised me by showing up with a small bouquet of flowers and a card congratulating me on my courage to pursue my passion. "You're going to do great things, Jessica," Carlos said as we took photos together after the ceremony. "You have the heart for this business, and you understand that feeding people is about more than just making money. That's what separates successful restaurants from the ones that fail." After graduation, I had 1 week to pack my belongings and prepare for the move to Phoenix. My parents helped with practical arrangements, driving me to purchase supplies, and assisting with transportation, but our interactions remained polite and distant. They were fulfilling their parental obligations while making it clear that they couldn't emotionally invest in a venture they considered doomed to failure. The most difficult goodbye was with my grandmother Rosa, who had always been my closest family confidant. She walked me to my packed car on the morning of my departure, holding my hands while she shared her final thoughts about my decision to leave home and start my own business. "Misha, I still think you're making a mistake," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades of experience. "But I also remember what it felt like to be young and determined to prove that I could build something on my own. Maybe you'll succeed and maybe you won't, but at least you'll know you tried." That's more than most people can say about their dreams. Her blessing, conditional though it was, meant more to me than all the opposition I had faced from other family members. Rosa understood the courage required to choose an uncertain path over a safe one, even if she wouldn't have made the same choice herself. She was sending me off with love despite her reservations, which felt like the kind of support I had been seeking from my parents all along. As I drove away from Riverside toward my new life in Phoenix, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror that I recognized as the natural response to stepping into the unknown. I was leaving behind the security of family support and predetermined career paths to build something that existed only in my imagination and business plans. The restaurant industry statistics my family had shared were real, and the challenges, they had described were legitimate concerns that David and I would need to navigate successfully. But I was also leaving behind the suffocating pressure of trying to live up to someone else's definition of success and the exhausting work of seeking approval for choices that were ultimately mine to make. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely free to succeed or fail based on my own efforts and decisions. The liberation was both thrilling and terrifying, exactly the way I imagined it should feel when someone finally chooses to bet on themselves instead of playing it safe. Part 8. The Authentic Pursuit. Phoenix in June was everything people had warned me about and nothing I was prepared for. The heat hit like opening an oven door, dry and relentless, turning my car into a sauna within minutes of parking, but there was something energizing about the intensity. The way the desert city refused to apologize for its extremes. It felt like the perfect place for someone who had just chosen the most extreme version of her own life. David met me at the restaurant, Space, on my first morning in town, keys in hand and a grin that told me he had been as eager as I was to finally begin the real work. The building looked different, empty than it had during our initial visits. More potential and less reality. But the bones were exactly what we needed. High ceilings, excellent natural light, and a kitchen layout that would allow for efficient workflow during busy service periods. "Welcome to Abuela's Kitchen," David said as he unlocked the front door, the ceremonial gesture marking the beginning of our journey from concept to reality. Ready to turn this place into something magical? The first month was pure construction, chaos mixed with bureaucratic nightmares that no business school course had adequately prepared me for. We needed permits for electrical work, plumbing modifications, and structural changes. We had to navigate health department regulations, fire safety requirements, and ADA compliance standards. Each agency had different forms, different timelines, and different interpretations of the same municipal codes. I spent entire days in government offices, learning to speak the language of building inspectors and zoning officials, while David coordinated with contractors and suppliers. The process was frustrating and expensive, but it was also oddly satisfying. Every approved permit and passed inspection represented progress toward our goal, tangible evidence that we were building something real rather than just dreaming about possibilities. The physical transformation of the space was more dramatic and rewarding than I had anticipated. We knocked down walls to create better sightlines between the kitchen and dining room, installed new flooring that would withstand heavy foot traffic while maintaining warmth and character, and painted everything in colors that evoked the comfort and vibrancy of a Mexican family kitchen. The work was hard and dirty, but I loved being able to see immediate results from our efforts. David proved to be an excellent partner in ways that extended far beyond his business expertise. He had a gift for managing contractors and suppliers, negotiating fair prices while maintaining positive relationships that would serve us well after opening. He understood the technical aspects of restaurant equipment and kitchen design, making sure we invested in tools that would help us work efficiently while staying within our budget constraints. More importantly, he shared my vision for what Abuela's Kitchen could become within the Phoenix dining scene. We weren't trying to compete with high-end establishments or fast casual chains. Instead, we wanted to create a neighborhood gathering, place where families could celebrate special occasions and weeknight dinners felt equally important. Our target customer was someone who wanted authentic flavors and generous portions in an atmosphere that felt welcoming rather than intimidating. Menu development became my primary focus once the construction phase was underway. I spent hours in the temporary kitchen we had set up in the back office, testing recipes and refining flavor profiles that would honor traditional Mexican cooking while appealing to diverse tastes. Each dish needed to tell a story about family, traditions, and cultural pride, but it also needed to be executable during busy service periods and profitable at reasonable price points. The signature dish that would eventually define our restaurant emerged from dozens of attempts to recreate my grandmother's mole recipe. Elena had never written down measurements or cooking times, relying instead on intuition and sensory cues that came from decades of experience. I had to reverse engineer her technique by tasting memory and adjusting ingredients until I achieved the complex, layered flavor that had made her version so special. The breakthrough came on a particularly frustrating afternoon when I had been working for 6 hours without achieving the right balance of chocolate, chili, and spice. I was about to give up when I remembered watching Elena toast individual spices in a dry pan, filling the kitchen with aromatic smoke, while she explained that each ingredient needed to be awakened before it could contribute its full flavor to the sauce. When I followed her technique exactly, toasting everything separately and grinding spices by hand, the mole finally tasted like home. David tried it and immediately understood why this recipe would become the centerpiece of our menu. The flavor was complex enough to impress experienced food lovers while remaining accessible to customers who had never tried authentic mole before. "This is it," he said, taking another spoonful and closing his eyes to focus on the taste. "This is what's going to make people drive across town and bring their friends. This is restaurant-quality execution of something that tastes like it came from someone's grandmother's kitchen." We developed the rest of the menu around that same philosophy. Familiar dishes elevated through careful technique and high-quality ingredients, presented in ways that felt both traditional and contemporary. Our carnitas were slow-cooked for 12 hours until they fell apart at the touch of a fork. Our guacamole was made fresh throughout the day in small batches, ensuring that every order had perfect texture and bright flavor. Our margaritas used fresh lime juice and premium tequila, served in glasses that were salt-rimmed individually rather than pre-prepared in bulk. The hiring process revealed another aspect of restaurant ownership that I hadn't fully appreciated during my planning phase. Finding the right employees wasn't just about technical skills or previous experience. It was about identifying people who shared our commitment to hospitality and understood that every interaction with customers was an opportunity to create positive memories. Our first hire was Maria Gonzalez, a server with 15 years of experience, who had worked at some of Phoenix's most respected restaurants. She interviewed on a day when I was feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of coordinating construction schedules, permit approvals, and menu testing, and her calm competence immediately made everything feel more manageable. "I've seen a lot of restaurants open and close," Maria said during our conversation. "The ones that succeed are usually the ones where the owners really care about every detail and treat their employees like family. From what I can see here, you and David are building something special." Maria became our informal hiring consultant, helping us identify candidates who would fit well with our restaurant culture and referring experienced cooks and servers from her professional network. Her endorsement carried weight with potential employees who were evaluating whether to take a chance on a new restaurant owned by first-time operators. The kitchen staff we assembled was a blend of experienced cooks who understood traditional Mexican techniques and younger culinary school graduates who brought contemporary skills and enthusiasm for learning. Our head cook, Roberto Flores, had worked in restaurant kitchens for 25 years and could execute our menu items with speed and consistency that impressed even David, who had consulted for dozens of professional kitchens. "These recipes are good," Roberto told me after working through our full menu during training week. "They respect the tradition, but they're not trying to be something they're not. This food will make people happy, and that's what matters in this business." The weeks leading up to our opening were an intensive crash course in operational details that no amount of planning could have fully prepared us for. We had to coordinate delivery schedules for fresh ingredients, train staff on point of sale, systems and service procedures, and test every aspect of our kitchen workflow under realistic service conditions. Each practice service revealed new challenges and opportunities for improvement. Our soft opening was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in late October, with invited guests including friends, family members of employees, and a few food bloggers who had expressed interest in our concept. I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, knowing that this would be our first opportunity to see whether months of planning and preparation would translate into the dining experience we had envisioned. David and I arrived at the restaurant at noon that day, 6 hours before service was scheduled to begin. The morning prep work was already underway, with Roberto and his team chopping vegetables, marinating proteins, and preparing sauces that would be needed throughout the evening. The dining room was set with fresh flowers, polished glassware, and printed menus that made our concept feel real and professional. "This is really happening," I said to David as we surveyed the scene, both of us slightly stunned by the realization that our months of planning were about to be tested by actual customers with real expectations and genuine appetites. The first customers arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, a couple in their 50s who had been following our progress on social media and were curious about our approach to Mexican cuisine. I watched from the kitchen pass as Maria greeted them, warmly, explaining our concept and making recommendations based on their flavor preferences. Her confidence and professionalism set the tone for the entire evening. By 7:30, we had served 43 customers and received overwhelmingly positive feedback about both food quality and service. The mole dish that had caused me so much anxiety was the evening's most popular entree, with several diners asking about the recipe and requesting to meet the chef. The atmosphere in the dining room was exactly what we had hoped to achieve. Relaxed but attentive, festive but not chaotic. The most gratifying moment came near the end of the evening, when an elderly Mexican woman approached me in the kitchen to compliment our food. She had immigrated to Phoenix 30 years earlier and had struggled to find restaurants that prepared traditional dishes with authentic flavors and proper techniques. "This tastes like my mother's cooking," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you for bringing real Mexican food to this neighborhood. You're doing something important here." Her words captured exactly what we had hoped to accomplish with Abuela's Kitchen. We weren't just serving food, we were preserving culinary traditions and creating connections between cultures through shared meals and hospitality. The restaurant was becoming what I had envisioned during those late nights in my college apartment. A place where food brought people together, and every meal felt like a celebration. As we cleaned up after that first service, I realized that the months of family, opposition, and doubt had actually prepared me well for the challenges of restaurant ownership. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to persist through criticism and setbacks, and to focus on long-term goals rather than immediate validation. The skills I had developed while defending my career choice were exactly the skills I needed to build a successful business. David and I sat at the bar after the last customer had left, sharing a beer and reviewing the evening's successes and opportunities for improvement. The soft opening had exceeded our expectations in every meaningful way, but we both understood that this was just the beginning of our real work. Tomorrow, we would open for regular service, and the following months would determine whether we could sustain the quality and consistency that would turn first-time customers into regular guests. "We did it," David said, raising his beer in a toast to our successful beginning. "Whatever happens next, we actually built something real and beautiful here." I looked around the dining room that we had created from nothing but vision and determination, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was completely different from any academic or professional achievement I had experienced. This restaurant was more than a business venture. It was proof that I had been right to trust my instincts and pursue my dreams, despite everyone's predictions of failure. Part 9. The Unexpected Ally. 3 months into regular operation, Abuela's Kitchen was surviving but not thriving in the ways I had hoped. We had developed a small but loyal customer base of neighborhood regulars who appreciated our authentic flavors and warm hospitality, but we were struggling to attract the broader Phoenix dining audience that would make our restaurant financially sustainable long-term. Our marketing efforts were limited by budget constraints, and word-of-mouth growth was slower than our business plan had projected. David and I were working 18-hour days, handling everything from food preparation to bookkeeping to social media management. The physical and emotional demands of restaurant ownership were more intense than I had anticipated, even after months of research and preparation. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk while updating inventory spreadsheets, only to wake up 4 hours later for the morning prep work that needed to be completed before lunch service. The financial pressure was constant and exhausting. Our initial investment had covered construction and equipment costs, but ongoing expenses consistently exceeded our conservative revenue projections. Food costs were higher than expected due to our commitment to premium ingredients and generous portion sizes. Labor costs were difficult to control because we refused to compromise on service quality by understaffing during busy periods. Most challenging was the isolation that came with owning a business that consumed every aspect of our lives. David and I were partners in every sense, but we were both too exhausted most days to provide each other with the emotional support that normal relationships required. We communicated primarily about operational issues, scheduling, inventory, needs, customer complaints, equipment maintenance, and the dozen other details that required daily attention. My relationship with my family remained cordially distant. My parents would ask polite questions about the restaurant during our brief phone conversations, but their tone made it clear that they viewed our struggles as confirmation of their initial concerns about the industry's instability. They never directly said they had been right about the risks of restaurant ownership, but their careful neutrality felt more condescending than outright criticism would have been. The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Elena Rodriguez, a food and lifestyle blogger who had built a substantial following by highlighting authentic cultural experiences throughout the Southwest. Elena wasn't a traditional food critic or restaurant reviewer. Instead, she focused on storytelling through cuisine, exploring how immigrant families and their descendants preserved cultural traditions through cooking and hospitality. Elena discovered Abuela's Kitchen on a quiet Thursday afternoon in February, 6 months after our opening. She had been driving through our neighborhood after visiting a nearby art gallery when she noticed our hand-painted sign and decided to stop for lunch. What should have been a quick meal turned into a 3-hour experience that would transform our restaurant's trajectory in ways neither David nor I could have imagined. I was working the front of house that day because Maria had called in sick, and I greeted Elena like any other solo diner looking for a comfortable spot to enjoy lunch. She ordered our mole enchiladas and a traditional horchata, settling into a corner table with her laptop and notebook in the way that suggested she was a regular remote worker who treated restaurants as temporary offices. What I didn't realize was that Elena was documenting every aspect of her dining experience, from the moment she walked through our front door to her final sip of Mexican coffee 2 hours later. She photographed not just her food, but also the hand-painted murals that depicted scenes from traditional Mexican markets, the family photos we had hung throughout the dining room, and the fresh flowers that we changed twice weekly to maintain the feeling of warmth and celebration. More importantly, Elena was listening to the conversations happening around her and observing the interactions between our staff and customers. She watched Roberto emerge from the kitchen to personally deliver a special dish he had prepared for a regular customer's birthday celebration. She noticed how Maria's replacement server remembered details about returning customers' preferences and dietary restrictions. She observed the way families lingered over meals, clearly comfortable and unhurried in our dining room. When Elena tasted the mole enchiladas, her reaction was immediate and emotional. She later wrote that the first bite transported her to her grandmother's kitchen in Tucson, where she had learned that food could be a form of storytelling and cultural preservation. The complexity of flavors in our mole sauce, the quality of our house-made tortillas, and the care evident in every aspect of the dish's preparation convinced her that she had discovered something special. Elena approached me before leaving that afternoon, introducing herself and asking about the inspiration behind our restaurant concept. What began as a brief conversation about family recipes and cultural traditions evolved into a detailed discussion about my grandmother's influence on my cooking, the challenges of opening a restaurant as a first-time owner, and our vision for creating a community gathering place that honored Mexican culinary heritage. Your story is exactly what my readers need to hear. Elena said as she prepared to leave. "You've created something authentic in a city full of restaurants that prioritize appearance over substance. Would you be interested in being featured in an article about Phoenix's hidden culinary gems?" I agreed immediately, having no idea that Elena's blog had over 50,000 dedicated subscribers and partnerships with major lifestyle publications throughout the region. Her articles regularly generated thousands of social media shares and drove significant traffic to the businesses she featured. More importantly, her audience consisted of food enthusiasts who actively sought out authentic cultural experiences and were willing to travel for exceptional dining opportunities. Elena returned the following week with a professional photographer, spending an entire afternoon documenting our food preparation process, interviewing our staff about their backgrounds and experiences, and capturing the atmosphere that made Abuela's kitchen feel different from typical Phoenix restaurants. She watched Roberto prepare mole from scratch, photographed the process of making fresh tortillas throughout the day, and documented the care that went into every aspect of our operation. The article Elena published 2 weeks later was more than a restaurant review. It was a love letter to authentic Mexican cuisine and immigrant entrepreneurship. She wrote about my journey from business school to restaurant ownership, the challenges David and I had faced during our opening months, and the cultural traditions we were working to preserve through our cooking and hospitality. Abuela's kitchen isn't just serving food, Elena wrote in her conclusion. Jessica Martinez and David Chen have created a space where culinary tradition meets contemporary hospitality, where every meal feels like an invitation into someone's family celebration. This is the kind of restaurant that reminds you why food matters beyond simple sustenance. The article included a dozen professional photographs that showcased our dishes in ways that highlighted both their visual appeal and their cultural authenticity. The mole enchiladas looked as rich and complex as they tasted. The carnitas appeared perfectly tender and flavorful. The dining room photographs captured the warm, welcoming atmosphere we had worked so hard to create. Elena's article was published on a Tuesday morning, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. By lunchtime, we had received over 30 phone calls requesting reservations for the upcoming weekend. Our social media followers increased by 800 people in a single day. The Phoenix food community, which I hadn't realized was so active and connected, began sharing Elena's article across multiple platforms. The first major rush came that Friday evening, when we served 97 customers instead of our usual 40 to 50. Roberto and I worked frantically in the kitchen, while David managed the front of house with Maria and our part-time server. The service was chaotic but successful, with every table receiving their orders within reasonable time frames, and most customers leaving enthusiastic reviews about both food quality and service. More significantly, the new customers weren't just trying us once out of curiosity. They were returning with friends and family members, creating the word-of-mouth growth that we had been hoping to achieve since opening. Our reservation book, which had been sparsely filled for months, suddenly showed bookings extending 3 weeks into the future. The success created new challenges that we hadn't anticipated during our struggling months. We needed additional staff to handle increased volume without compromising service quality. We had to adjust our food ordering to accommodate higher customer counts while maintaining our commitment to fresh ingredients and minimal waste. We needed to expand our wine and beer selection to meet the expectations of customers who were choosing us for special occasion dining. Most challenging was learning to manage our own expectations and energy levels during this period of rapid growth. David and I had become accustomed to working every service ourselves, handling everything from greeting customers to washing dishes when needed. Suddenly, we had to trust new employees with responsibilities that felt too important to delegate. While simultaneously expanding our operations to meet demand we had dreamed about but never experienced. The media attention expanded beyond Elena's initial article. Phoenix Magazine contacted us about inclusion in their annual Best New Restaurants feature. a local television news program wanted to film a segment about successful small businesses. That had opened during challenging economic conditions. Food Network's website published an article about authentic Mexican restaurants worth traveling for, featuring Abuela's Kitchen alongside established venues in cities throughout the Southwest. Each piece of coverage brought new customers and additional credibility within Phoenix's dining scene. Restaurant industry professionals began visiting to evaluate our food and service, often introducing themselves as chefs or managers from other establishments who had heard positive things about our concept and execution. These visits felt like informal auditions that we were somehow passing, gaining acceptance into a community we had been working to join since opening. The most gratifying recognition came from the Mexican-American community in Phoenix, many of whom had been skeptical that a young restaurant owner could authentically represent their cultural traditions. Elderly customers began bringing their adult children and grandchildren to Abuela's Kitchen, proudly explaining that we prepared traditional dishes the way their own grandmothers had taught them decades earlier. "This is real Mexican food," one grandmother told her teenage granddaughter during a Sunday lunch visit. "Not the fake stuff from chain restaurants, but food that tastes like home. You need to remember these flavors so you can teach your own children someday." These endorsements from community elders meant more to me than any professional review or media coverage. They confirmed that our commitment to authenticity was resonating with people who had the cultural knowledge to distinguish between genuine and imitative Mexican cuisine. We weren't just succeeding as a business, we were fulfilling our mission of preserving and sharing culinary traditions that connected families across generations. The financial transformation was as dramatic as the operational changes. Within 3 months of Elena's article, our monthly revenue had increased by 230%. We were finally generating enough profit to pay ourselves modest salaries while reinvesting in restaurant improvements and staff expansion. The constant anxiety about cash flow and bill payments was replaced by the more pleasant challenge of managing growth and maintaining quality during busy periods. David and I were able to hire 2 additional full-time servers and a prep cook, allowing us to focus more on strategic planning and less on daily operational tasks. We expanded our catering services, which had been a small part of our business model, but became increasingly popular as Phoenix families discovered our food through dining room visits. We began planning a second location, something that had seemed impossible during our struggling first months, but now felt like a natural next step. The success also created opportunities for community involvement that aligned with our values and mission. We began hosting fundraising dinners for local nonprofits, donating portions of our proceeds to organizations that supported immigrant families and cultural education programs. We partnered with nearby schools to provide authentic Mexican food for cultural celebration events, exposing children to traditional flavors and cooking techniques. Elena became more than just the blogger who had discovered us. She became a friend and informal advisor who understood both the food industry and the challenges of small business ownership. She continued to feature Abuela's Kitchen in her articles about Phoenix dining trends, but she also provided guidance about managing growth, maintaining authenticity during expansion, and building relationships within the local restaurant community. "You've proven that authenticity and quality will always find an audience," Elena told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. "The challenge now is scaling your success without losing the personal touch that makes Abuela's Kitchen special. That's where most restaurants struggle, but I think you and David have the right instincts to navigate that transition successfully." Her confidence in our long-term prospects felt especially meaningful because it came from someone who had observed dozens of restaurants during various stages of their development. Elena had seen establishments fail despite initial success, and she had watched others build sustainable operations that served their communities for decades. Her endorsement suggested that we had created something with genuine staying power. The media attention also attracted interest from potential investors who wanted to partner with us on expansion plans. We received several offers to franchise our concept or accept funding for rapid growth throughout the Southwest. These opportunities were flattering and potentially lucrative, But David and I ultimately decided to maintain control over our operations and expand more gradually to preserve the quality and culture that had made our initial location successful. "We didn't build this restaurant to get rich quick," David explained to one particularly persistent investor. "We built it to create something meaningful that would last. Rapid expansion might generate short-term profits, but it would probably destroy the authenticity that our customers value most." Our decision to prioritize sustainability over rapid growth reflected lessons we had learned during our challenging first months. The struggle to establish ourselves had taught us that restaurant success required patience, consistency, and genuine commitment to hospitality rather than just ambition and financial resources. The customers who had supported us during difficult times deserved our continued attention to detail and personal service. 6 months after Elena's initial article, Abuela's Kitchen was consistently booked 2 weeks in advance for weekend dining and had developed a reputation as one of Phoenix's most authentic Mexican restaurants. We were receiving positive reviews from professional food critics, recommendations from other restaurant owners, and most importantly, repeat business from customers who had made us part of their regular dining routines. The transformation was so dramatic that it sometimes felt surreal. I would stand in our busy dining room on Saturday evenings, watching servers navigate between tables full of happy customers, listening to conversations in both English and Spanish, observing families celebrating birthdays and anniversaries in the space David and I had created from nothing but vision and determination. Elena's unexpected discovery of our restaurant had provided the catalyst we needed to reach our potential. But the sustained success was the result of months of hard work, commitment to quality, and genuine passion for hospitality. Her article had introduced us to new customers, but our food, service, and atmosphere had convinced those customers to return and recommend us to others. The partnership with Elena also taught me important lessons about the power of storytelling in business success. Her article hadn't just described our food, it had shared the narrative behind our restaurant, the cultural traditions we were preserving, and the personal journey that had led me from business school to restaurant ownership. Customers were responding not just to our mole enchiladas, but to the story those enchiladas represented about family, tradition, and the courage to pursue dreams despite opposition. As the 1-year anniversary of our opening approached, I realized that Elena's role in our success represented something larger about the importance of finding allies who believe in your vision even when others are skeptical. She had recognized the value of what we were creating before we had fully proven ourselves, providing the platform we needed to reach customers who shared our appreciation for authentic cultural experiences. Her support had come at exactly the moment when David and I were beginning to question whether we had made the right choice in opening Abuela's Kitchen. The financial pressure and operational challenges of our first months had been more intense than we had anticipated, and we were both wondering whether our family members' concerns about restaurant ownership had been justified. Elena's article had provided the boost we needed to push through that difficult period and reach the success we had always believed was possible. The relationship with Elena also demonstrated the importance of building genuine connections with people who understand and appreciate your work. She hadn't featured us because of a financial arrangement or promotional campaign. She had written about Abuela's Kitchen because she genuinely believed in what we were doing and wanted to share our story with her audience. That authenticity had resonated with readers in ways that paid advertising could never achieve. Looking back, I realized that Elena's discovery of our restaurant hadn't been entirely accidental. We had created something worth finding, and someone who appreciated authenticity and quality had eventually found us. Her role as an unexpected ally had been crucial to our success, but the foundation for that success had been built through months of commitment to excellence, cultural authenticity, and genuine hospitality. The experience taught me that business success often comes from sources you don't expect, and at moments when you most need support. Elena had appeared in our dining room during one of our most challenging periods, when we were struggling with self-doubt and financial pressure. Her recognition and promotion of our work had provided exactly the boost we needed to reach our potential and begin building the sustainable success we had always envisioned. As our first year concluded and our second year began, Elena remained a regular customer and continued advocate for Abuela's Kitchen. She brought friends and visiting food writers to experience our hospitality, ensuring that our reputation continued to grow within Phoenix's culinary community. Her ongoing support reminded me daily that finding the right allies can make the difference between struggling to survive and thriving beyond your initial expectations. The transformation from unknown neighborhood restaurant to recognized Phoenix dining destination had happened more quickly than David and I had dared to hope. But the foundation for sustained success had been built through patient attention to every detail of our operation. Elena's unexpected advocacy had provided the catalyst we needed, but our commitment to authenticity and excellence had created the substance that kept customers returning and recommending us to others. Now, as we prepared to open our second location and expand our catering services, I understood that success in the restaurant industry required both the vision to create something meaningful and the patience to wait for the right people to discover and appreciate what you've built. Elena had been that person for us, the unexpected ally whose recognition had transformed our dreams into sustainable reality. The morning I received the phone call that would complete my family's transformation was like any other Tuesday in March. Busy with prep work and vendor deliveries as we prepared for another full day of service. David was reviewing our weekend catering orders while I worked on inventory management. Both of us settled into the comfortable routine that had developed over 15 months of partnership and restaurant operation. The caller introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez from Phoenix Business Journal, no relation despite sharing my surname, and explained that Abuela's Kitchen had been selected as Phoenix's Small Business of the Year for our contribution to the city's cultural dining scene and our success as a minority-owned enterprise. The award came with a feature article, a formal recognition ceremony, and inclusion in a special publication celebrating Phoenix's most innovative small businesses. Your restaurant represents exactly the kind of entrepreneurial success story that makes Phoenix's business community so dynamic, Rebecca explained. You've created something authentic and sustainable while contributing to the cultural richness of our dining scene. The selection committee was unanimous in choosing Abuela's Kitchen for this year's recognition. The award was completely unexpected and represented a level of mainstream business recognition that extended far beyond the food industry praise we had received throughout our first year. Phoenix Business Journal was read by corporate executives, city officials, and business leaders throughout the metropolitan area, including the professional community where my parents had built their reputation and relationships. David and I spent the rest of that morning calling our staff to share the news and discussing how this recognition might affect our operations and expansion plans. The award ceremony was scheduled for the following month, with an audience of several hundred business leaders and city officials. The feature article would be published the week before the ceremony, ensuring significant visibility for our restaurant within Phoenix's broader business community. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly news of the award would reach my family in Riverside. Phoenix Business Journal's website published an advance notice about award recipients the same afternoon Rebecca called, and by evening my phone was buzzing with congratulatory messages from relatives and family friends who had discovered the announcement through social media shares and online searches. The first call came from my cousin Elena, the same person who had lectured me about restaurant failure statistics 2 years earlier. Her tone was completely different now, filled with excitement and pride about our family's business success. She had already shared the Phoenix Business Journal article on her Facebook page, highlighting her connection to the award-winning restaurant owner and expressing her excitement about visiting Abuela's Kitchen during her next trip to Arizona. "Jessica, I am so proud of you," Elena gushed over the phone. "I always knew you had the drive to build something amazing. This award proves that you made exactly the right choice when you decided to follow your passion instead of taking the safe route. I can't wait to tell everyone at work about my successful entrepreneur cousin." Her enthusiasm would have been gratifying if I hadn't clearly remembered her previous warnings about restaurant ownership and her predictions about inevitable failure. The complete reversal of her position, without any acknowledgement of her earlier skepticism, felt like revisionist history designed to claim association with success she had never expected to witness. Similar calls followed throughout the evening from relatives who had been notably absent during our challenging opening months, but were now eager to celebrate our achievements and claim connection to our success. Each conversation followed the same pattern: effusive congratulations, expressions of family pride, and requests for reservations or catering services that positioned the caller as a supportive family member rather than someone who had doubted our prospects from the beginning. The most significant call came from my brother Michael, whose support had been cautious but genuine throughout our restaurant journey. Unlike other family members who were now rewriting their previous skepticism, Michael acknowledged the complexity of our success and the courage it had required to persist through challenging periods when failure seemed more likely than recognition. "Jess, I have to admit that I didn't think you could pull this off," he said honestly. "The restaurant business seemed too risky and too difficult for someone without industry experience. But you proved that passion and determination can overcome obstacles that stop other people. I'm genuinely impressed by what you and David have built." Michael's honest acknowledgement of his previous doubts made his current congratulations feel authentic in ways that other family responses did not. He wasn't trying to rewrite history or claim that he had always believed in our potential. Instead, he was recognizing that our success had changed his understanding of what was possible when someone committed fully to pursuing their dreams despite external skepticism. The most challenging call came from my sister Amanda, who wanted to arrange a family visit to Phoenix for the award ceremony. She explained that our parents were eager to attend the event and celebrate our achievement, having followed our progress through social media and family updates, even though they had maintained their distance during our most difficult periods. "Mom and Dad want to be there for your big moment," Amanda said carefully. "They know things have been strained between you all, but they're really proud of what you've accomplished. This award proves that you made the right choice, and they want to show their support publicly." Her request created a dilemma I hadn't anticipated when accepting the Business Journal's recognition. The award ceremony was meant to celebrate our achievements and acknowledge the hard work that had made our success possible. Having my family present would complete the picture of entrepreneurial triumph, but their attendance would also require me to navigate the emotional complexity of welcoming people who had withheld their support during our most challenging periods. I told Amanda I would consider their request and discuss it with David before making a decision about family attendance at the ceremony. The conversation ended with her promising to coordinate travel arrangements and assuring me that our parents only wanted to celebrate our success without reopening previous disagreements about career choices and family expectations. David's perspective on the family situation was characteristically practical and supportive. He understood the emotional complexity of my relationship with my parents, while recognizing that their attendance at the award ceremony could be meaningful for both personal and professional reasons. Phoenix's business community would expect successful entrepreneurs to be supported by their families, and having my parents present would reinforce our image as a stable, well-connected small business. "This is your call completely," David said, as we discussed the situation over dinner that evening. "If having them there would make the evening more stressful instead of more celebratory, then they shouldn't come. But if you think their presence would feel like resolution rather than complication, then maybe this is the right moment for family reconciliation." His analysis helped me understand that my decision about family attendance was really a decision about what kind of relationship I wanted to have moving forward. I could use their previous lack of support as justification for excluding them from celebrating our success. Or I could view their desire to attend as evidence that our achievements had changed their understanding of our capabilities and choices. The feature article in Phoenix Business Journal was published 3 weeks later, including professional photographs of David and me in our restaurant, along with detailed information about our business model, growth trajectory, and plans for expansion. The article emphasized our commitment to cultural authenticity, our success in building a loyal customer base, and our contribution to Phoenix's reputation as a destination for diverse culinary experiences. Reading about our journey in the context of Phoenix's broader business community felt surreal and validating simultaneously. The article positioned us alongside other successful entrepreneurs who had built meaningful enterprises through vision, determination, and strategic execution. Our restaurant was no longer just a neighborhood dining spot. It was recognized as a significant business achievement worthy of citywide celebration. The article also included quotes from Elena Rodriguez, who had become our unofficial spokesperson within Phoenix's food community. She described our impact on the local dining scene and our role in elevating Phoenix's reputation for authentic cultural cuisine. Her continued advocacy reinforced the credibility that had made our success possible and demonstrated the ongoing importance of maintaining relationships with people who genuinely understood our mission. Most significantly, the article included financial information about our growth and profitability that provided concrete evidence of our business success. Revenue figures, employment numbers, and expansion plans presented our achievements in terms that business leaders could easily understand and respect. We weren't just following our passion, we were building a profitable enterprise that contributed to Phoenix's economic vitality. The week before the award ceremony, I finally made the decision to invite my family to attend the event. The choice was motivated partly by a desire for personal resolution and partly by recognition that their presence would represent the complete transformation of our family's understanding of entrepreneurial success. Having them witness our public recognition would demonstrate how dramatically our circumstances had changed since the confrontations of 2 years earlier. I called my parents directly to extend the invitation, explaining that David and I would be honored to have family present during such an important moment in our business development. The conversation was warm but careful, with both sides avoiding direct references to our previous disagreements while focusing on the positive aspects of our current success. "We are so proud of what you've accomplished, Mija," my mother said, her voice carrying genuine emotion for the first time in months. "We always knew you were capable of great things, and this award proves that you found the right path for your talents and ambitions." Her words represented a complete reversal of her previous position, reframing our family's history in ways that minimized their opposition and emphasized their ongoing pride in our achievements. The revisionist approach was typical of how my family handled difficult topics, but I chose to accept their congratulations gracefully rather than relitigating past conflicts that no longer seemed relevant to our current circumstances. The award ceremony itself was held at Phoenix's most prestigious hotel, with an audience of over 300 business leaders, city officials, and entrepreneurs from throughout the metropolitan area. David and I were seated at a table near the front of the ballroom, surrounded by other award recipients and their families, representing various sectors of Phoenix's economy and contributing to the city's reputation for innovation and entrepreneurship. My family arrived early and spent the cocktail hour networking with other attendees, introducing themselves proudly as the parents and siblings of the Small Business of the Year recipient. They had clearly researched the other honorees and prepared talking points about our restaurant's success and their support for our entrepreneurial journey. Watching them work the room with confidence and enthusiasm, I realized they had completely adopted our success as their own achievement. The most powerful moment of the evening came when I accepted the award on behalf of Abuela's Kitchen, delivering a brief speech about our journey from concept to recognition. I talked about the importance of authentic cultural representation in Phoenix's dining scene, the value of pursuing entrepreneurial dreams despite skepticism from others, and the gratitude David and I felt for the community support that had made our success possible. 2 years ago, many people thought we were making a mistake by choosing the restaurant industry over more traditional career paths, I said, looking directly at my family's table. Tonight's recognition proves that success comes in many forms, and that following your passion with dedication and strategic planning can create results that exceed everyone's initial expectations. The applause that followed felt like vindication for every moment of doubt we had experienced during our challenging first months. The audience of business leaders was celebrating not just our current success, but our courage to pursue an unconventional path and our persistence through difficulties. That had seemed overwhelming at various points during our journey. After the ceremony, my parents approached David and me with congratulations that felt more genuine than any interaction we had shared since announcing our restaurant plans. They asked detailed questions about our expansion plans, our staffing, strategy, and our long-term vision for building a sustainable enterprise within Phoenix's competitive dining market. "We owe you an apology," my father said privately as the evening wound down. "We were so focused on protecting you from risk that we couldn't see the potential for what you were trying to build. This success didn't happen by accident. It happened because you had vision and worked incredibly hard to make that vision reality." His acknowledgement meant more than the formal award or the public recognition, representing the family reconciliation I had hoped for but never demanded. They weren't just celebrating our success, they were recognizing the validity of choices. They had initially opposed and acknowledging that their concerns had been based on incomplete understanding of our capabilities and determination. The transformation of my family's attitude toward our restaurant venture was complete and permanent. They became enthusiastic promoters of Abuela's Kitchen within their social and professional networks, bringing friends and business associates to experience our hospitality and recommending our catering services for events and celebrations. Their support felt genuine rather than obligatory, based on authentic appreciation for what we had accomplished rather than just family loyalty. Over the following months, my parents visited Phoenix regularly to spend time with David and me, while also enjoying meals at our restaurant. They began to understand the daily challenges and rewards of restaurant ownership, observing the complexity of operations we managed and the relationships we had built with customers and staff. Their respect for our work grew as they witnessed firsthand the skills and commitment required to sustain our success. The most gratifying aspect of our family reconciliation was how naturally it evolved from public recognition to private relationship repair. The award ceremony had provided a framework for moving past previous disagreements, but the ongoing improvement in our family dynamics was based on genuine mutual respect and shared pride in our achievements. My mother began bringing her friends to Abuela's Kitchen for special occasion dinners, proudly explaining our concept and sharing details about my culinary training and business development. Her enthusiasm was infectious and authentic, representing a complete shift from her previous embarrassment about our career choices to genuine pride in our entrepreneurial success. The family reconciliation also strengthened my relationship with David, who had witnessed the emotional toll of their initial opposition and understood how much their eventual support meant to our personal happiness and professional confidence. Having family backing for our expansion plans and long-term vision provided stability and encouragement that enhanced our partnership in both business and personal contexts. As our second year of operation concluded and we prepared to open our second location, I reflected on how dramatically our circumstances had changed since those initial family confrontations about career choices and risk tolerance. The restaurant industry recognition, business award, and family reconciliation represented a complete vindication of our decision to pursue entrepreneurial dreams despite widespread skepticism. The success of Abuela's Kitchen had proven that authenticity, dedication, and strategic planning could overcome industry challenges and family opposition to create something meaningful and sustainable. We had built not just a profitable business, but a cultural institution that served Phoenix's diverse community, while honoring Mexican culinary traditions and creating opportunities for employee advancement and professional development. The journey from family rejection to public recognition had taught me that success often requires patience and persistence through periods when support seems absent and failure appears more likely than achievement. The people who had doubted our potential had eventually become our strongest advocates, but only after we had proven ourselves through consistent performance and unwavering commitment to our original vision. Standing in our bustling dining room on busy Saturday evenings, watching families celebrate special occasions while enjoying food that honored my grandmother's traditions, I understood that we had created something far more valuable than just financial success. We had built a legacy that connected generations through shared meals and cultural preservation, proving that following your dreams with courage and determination can create results that exceed everyone's initial expectations. The transformation was complete, the recognition was earned, and the future held unlimited possibilities for continued growth and impact within Phoenix's business community. What had started as a young woman's rebellious choice to reject family expectations had evolved into a celebrated example of entrepreneurial success and cultural contribution that made our entire family proud to be associated with our achievements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.